Hi, and welcome to my channel, Rolling into Retirement. I'm Mike. Thanks for joining me on this journey. I do appreciate you being here. So today's topic is going to be a fairly short video about one of the many things that I think about when I'm getting ready to run or am running an RPG. I want to talk a little bit about the options on how to run a game at your table and try to outline some of the reasons that I choose the style that I use. Okay, are we ready to imagine what's ahead? Let's go. As the title of the video implies, today I want to talk a little bit about the options for gameplay at your table. I wanted to provide my thoughts on the whole map mode versus theater of the mind tug of war. So I'll say this first. There is no right way to play an RPG, especially in terms of what you're using, whether it's be maps or theater of the mind. The game is going to be dependent on many factors, including your ability to be descriptive, your player's willingness and ability to use their imagination, the tools that you might have at hand, the space you may have to play in, and a whole bunch of other ones. For me, there's always been this sort of tug of war, for lack of a better term, that I feel in my mind before I attempt to run a scenario or a campaign. On the one side of the equation in my head, I'm looking for something tactile. I have this need to provide something tactile to show my players. I want them to see something physical that provides at least some of the clues to the world and the environment that they're playing in. On the other side of the equation is my need to provide detail. Maps, as much as I love them, don't always do a good job of providing the details that you might find important or that might help the players understand the place that they are exploring better. Since the maps don't provide that level of detail, I want to be able to flesh out the mental images that the players are forming so that they can feel more connected to the world. In this case, being descriptive is the key to making whatever you are running feel more real. When I say maps, I'm actually being generic for a reason. There are so many different types of maps and mapping options out there that you can't really define what a map should be in some games. A map can be anything, really. It can be a hand-drawn layout of an area that I made on the fly and thrown onto an erasable battle mat. It can be a dungeon map that I've copied from an adventure and slowly revealing to the players as they explore it. It can be an old treasure map that a pirate or brigand left behind after the party looted their hideout. It can be an overland hex map showing an entire area that the players need to explore. If you're playing old school, it can even be the hand-drawn map that the players come up with as they explore the area. So there's just so many different options. The map, though, only tells half the story. For instance, how does a map show you that the halls that they are wandering are long unused, or if there's been recent foot traffic? How does it show you what the walls are made of? How does it show you if there's anything interesting inscribed on the walls? What's the lighting source? Is there an odor or anything distinctive about the hall that the players are exploring that they need to know? Can you hear those orcs down the hallway behind that door? There are so many little details that you could add to your description of a simple hallway that a map will never be able to replicate. Being able to add that level of detail is actually tied into the other part of the tug of war, the theater of the mind approach. The strength of the map-based system is that everyone at the table knows where everything and everyone is in relation to each other and portions of the environment. That's kind of important to some players. At least for me, theater of the mind doesn't need a map to show where the players are or what they see ahead of them. The DM or GM takes on the role of the player's eyes and ears to describe the scene to them and provide some context clues that the players may choose to explore further. Theater of the mind play is great for DMs or GMs that are able to clearly envision the scene in their minds and be able to describe or improvise different items within that scene kind of on the fly. They can add detail to any scene and provide context clues to their players as they explore the environment around them. This approach doesn't need anything tactile or physical, since it lets the players imagine the scene or situations in their minds with the help of the DM's GM to guide their thoughts. The strength of the theater of the mind approach is that it allows for the GM to really flesh out the scene for their players, providing details that would never be available through other means. So, does it have to be one way or another in terms of how you approach gameplay? Obviously not. At least in my mind, a mixed approach to gameplay provides the most flexibility and options for both the players and the DM or GM. Having a basic map showing the situation that the players are facing is important so that everyone is on the same page as to what is going on. In a combat example, everyone knows where the objects and enemies are in relation to them, and players can figure out targeting and strategy on how to approach that situation. But when we're looking at a trap or a puzzle, giving the players clues about their environment verbally is a much better option than just showing them something on a map and asking them, what do you want to do? Without context or verbal or visual clues, the players are left to figure things out on their own. A simple map is just not going to provide the types of clues that they would need to help solve the problem. In this case, having the DM or GM provide some information on the area in front of or around the trap may allow the players to figure out approaches that may not have been obvious just from looking at the map. And maps aren't really the only option. If you aren't interested in using full maps or just don't have the space, consider using Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, or UDT for short. I originally saw this on an episode of Professor Dungeon Master, and that's kind of cool. I'll provide a link to the video below if you're interested in learning more about the UDT. But in that situation, you can provide some minimal details on the encounter that you're in and provide the narrative, the theater of the mind aspect, to flesh out the scene that you're trying to play out. While I don't personally own one of these UDTs, since most of my players recently have been online via the VTT, I've always been interested in trying to use them. To me, it actually is the best of both worlds option in terms of the map versus theater of the mind. You're actually providing a map of at least a positioning, but then you're describing what that situation looks like. So I've talked about the options that we have when setting up to play a game. What I haven't really talked about yet is what my approach is. Now, I can honestly admit that my powers of improvisation aren't the greatest. I'm much better at playing out the different non-player characters that my group meets on the fly than being able to describe what a dungeon hallway looks like. In the situation of the NPCs, I can write a few select words, come up with some reasonably believable NPCs, and just run with it. It's much easier for me. I struggle a lot with trying to provide the right amount of detail when describing a scene, and I need to write down specific items that need to be described in that scene. It's not something that I can easily come up with on the fly, even though I have done it a few times in the past. I know I'm just not great at it. So based on what I know about myself, both my strengths and my weaknesses, I know that I'm probably better served by using maps as the basis for my adventures and then adding additional contextual detail about the world surrounding the players to my notes before the session begins. If I'm running a science fiction encounter, I want to talk about the condition of the walls, like blood splatter, blaster damage, etc., as I show the players the map. Then I want to talk about whether the air is circulating or stagnant if they aren't wearing vacuum suits. I want to talk about the gravity, the sounds, the smells, weird things floating around in the air in the corridors, all those little details that we'll never come across on the map. Now, full disclosure, all of this information I write down ahead of time so that I can remember to add it, and the details are consistent throughout the adventure. I can't rely on my game time brain to remember all those details, as I will invariably leave something out. The problem for me is figuring out what that level of detail is. Too much detail is unnecessary. Not enough detail may leave out important clues that the players need. I struggle with that too. That's one of the reasons that I write down a lot of these things ahead of time. So does that mean I can't run Theater of the Mind as a playstyle? Uh, Certainly not, but I know that I won't be able to keep up with the level of detail needed to describe the scenes the players are encountering over the long term. I use Theater of the Mind in situations where the players are well off the trail, and I just need to provide some context for the new area that they've stumbled into that I did not prepare. If the players get back on track, all is right with the world, and I can continue with my descriptions as I have written them down in advance. If not, well, that's where things get a little rougher. Once my brain has been stretched to the point where I'm running low on available brain cells, I can call the game at that point and regroup for the next session so that I am prepared. For me, I can probably do Theater of the Mind or off-the-cuff stuff maybe half an hour, maybe 45 minutes before I run low on the brain cells. Overall, I think any DM or GM can run a combination of both styles as long as they recognize their personal strengths and weaknesses in terms of their improvisational skill set. As I've said, my personal skill set is just better at upfront prep and having maps to provide the basis of my descriptions. There are many other GMs out there that are much better at the opposite approach, and that's very cool. So those are my thoughts on the maps versus Theater of the Mind decision when you're setting up a game. How do you all feel about the different options? Can you think of other options to approach the gameplay that I haven't talked about? As always, I really appreciate you spending your time listening to me. I hope you have a great rest of your week ahead. Take care.